Good afternoon, Notre Dame fans, and welcome to the Irish Breakdown podcast. I am Vince D'Addario. I am the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com, and with me, as always, is Brian Driscoll. He is the publisher at irishbreakdown.com, and today we are jumping right back into our position previews, and we have two more to go on offense. And so today we're going to talk tight ends. And you know, it's funny. We were talking about, shows we want to do in the future and, what kind of question gets asked a lot, over in our chat area and, let's do a show on that. Well, we're kind of doing that today, Brian, because people always like to ask, well, who's going to be that alpha wide receiver? Who's going to step up and be that guy? Because it always appears that there is one, right, in the wide receiver core. And we're going to talk about that guy today, but he doesn't go to meetings in the wide receiver room. He goes to meetings in the tight end room. And of course, that is incoming sophomore, Michael Mayer.
Rising sophomore. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've seen Notre Dame have some pretty good teams where their tight end was the alpha. I mean, they had a pretty good team in 2012 where the tight end was the alpha, Tyler Eifert. And I think that Michael Mayer is more of that kind of player than he is a Durham Smythe or an Alizé Jones or even a Tommy Trumbull. I think he's more Cole Kmet, more Kyle Rudolph, more Tyler Eifert in regards to he can be a difference maker.
Right.
And I think that's going to be a big thing for him and then for the offense. And then that allows some other players to kind of grow into that role. And it allows other players like I think Avery Davis is going to have a really good year for Notre Dame this year, but he's not Will Fuller. He's not Michael Floyd. He's not Golden Tate. So you don't necessarily want him having to be that 8-catch, 100-plus yard guy.
He's not a guy you want to put the whole team on his back.
Right.
He
needs to be a really good complementary player.
Right.
Absolutely. He needs to be more Hunter Renfrow than T. Higgins, essentially.
Right.
Which is an incredibly important role. I mean, if Clemson doesn't win their first national title without Hunter Renfrow, right? I mean,
no doubt.
So it's not an insult. It's just that some guys are excellent players in certain roles. And right now there aren't any receivers that are established dudes, the go-to guys, even Braden Lindsey. If Braden Lindsey is healthy and everything that I think he should be this year, he's not Will Fuller. He's not that number one volume plus big play guy. Kevin Alston, can he stay healthy? There's all types of question marks at that position. If Michael Mayer is the player we think he is, and steps up and plays the way that we think he is going to play, then he becomes that guy. He becomes that dude that you build the offense, and then everybody else kind of fits into it. The backs fit into it in the pass game. The receivers fit into it in the pass game. And then that allows you to then do more different things with those guys matchup-wise. Once you've determined how they're going to defend Michael Mayer, the opponent, then it allows you to kind of say, okay, well, this is how we're going to use these other guys. This is how we're going to take advantage of how they're playing Michael Mayer.
Right.
Opportunities for Kyron Williams or Chris Tyree or Braden Lindsey or Lawrence Keys or Avery Davis or Kevin Austin or Xavier Watts or Lorenzo Stein, all those guys, right? And that's what makes him a really unique weapon. And we'll dive into some reasons why it's going to be different than it was last year. Last year he was sort of a volume complementary player.
Right. Yep.
This year he is going to be a volume go-to player.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the difference.
Yeah, we're going to break that down here in just a second, but let's talk a little bit about where, because look, he is a rising sophomore, right? He's played 1 year of football, and he wasn't the guy really last year, although we saw flashes.
Yeah.
And we know what he can be, but where does he need to improve the most going into his sophomore year? Because his role is going to be a little bit different.
Well, let's kind of begin too, is because there's going to be some pushback on the notion that he wasn't a go-to player last year, because they're going to look at his production and say he tied for the team lead in receptions.
Right.
What you have to do is look at where a lot of those receptions were coming from. A lot of his receptions on checkdowns, crossing routes, things where he was the second and third option, but the quarterback came down to him. There were times when he was certainly a lead option, but the point is he wasn't a guy that the entire staff built the offense around. He wasn't a guy whereas every week he was the go-to guy. He was who you were game planning to get the ball to. He was all those type of things. That wasn't his role last year. His role was a piece to the puzzle. He wasn't what Cole Kmet was or what Chase Claypool was or what Tyler Eifert was. So that's what we meant by him being a volume complementary player, because, again, go back and look at all 42 of his catches. A lot of that stuff were on options, crossers, things like that, where he wasn't the main guy. So then when you look at Tyler Eifert in the areas where he has to improve this year, I think the first one is he's just got to be more consistent. Last year we saw a guy with a great deal of talent, a guy that can make a lot of plays, a guy that has very unique skill set. I mean, you don't see tight ends able to make plays after the catch the way that Michael Mayer can make plays after the catch. That's certainly a very, very important weapon for what he is about to do. And then you look at some other areas where he's got to improve. I think there's some technical areas in the pass game. I think he needs to just be a little bit crisper on routes. He has a really good feel for route running for a freshman, but I think any freshman has areas where he can continue to improve and grow his game and develop his game. Those are some things I think, a little bit more consistency with his top ends to create more initial separation out of breaks, or some things he can work on. He's only going to get stronger, which is going to help him continue to be even more effective. We started to see that in the spring. He was just making catches this spring, in the practices and where you got guys hanging on him and he's still making catches. I've talked to multiple sources and they're like, he was just an unguardable guy this spring for the Notre Dame offense. So that part of his game is improved. And I think the biggest area where there's room for improvement for him is as a blocker. The thing I loved about Michael Mayer as a freshman was his want to in the run game. There was no doubt he was willing as a blocker. He competed as a blocker. It was more of a technique thing. And then look, even being advanced for a freshman, you're still not as strong as juniors and seniors. I mean, it's just not the way that it is. I mean, and so those are areas where there's still room for him to improve. Getting stronger, especially lower body, is going to help. But then just like little things. And when we talk about him being a blocker, the willingness was there. He competed, but just little things like, not taking the proper angle to attack a guy, which allowed him to get beat inside, or maybe he doesn't get the reach block, things like that. Just little technical parts of his game that I think in the run game can improve to make him a more effective blocker. And look, in space, he's going to be fine. It's more about getting him to be more effective as a point of attack blocker, which is sort of as that, that attached to the line of scrimmage kind of guy, a guy that, can just really dominate at the edge. And that's, so that's kind of where I think his game needs to be at this point in time. And I think another part of Michael Mayer making big strides this season is how he's used. He needs to be used a lot different than he was in 2020. Now, that is not a criticism of the coaching staff. Michael Mayer was a true freshman that was learning everything. He did not have a spring. He was not going to have a spring anyway because he was not an early enrollee. He was not a kid that, in my opinion, was going to go out and, as advanced as he was still a freshman. I mean, it's as simple as that. He was still a freshman. And when you look at a guy like Michael Mayer and you say, how much do you really want to throw on his shoulders as a freshman? And that's what it came down to. You had Brock Wright, you had Tommy Tremble, you had Javon McKinley, you had Ben Skoranek, you had all these other players. You want to bring him along. You don't necessarily want to have him be a guy that you throw everything on right away. And so that's where he was as a freshman. So this isn't a criticism of how they used him as a freshman. I think there are always ways you could have used him, maybe a little bit differently, a little bit here and there. But some of that to me was a product of the quarterback and just the nature of how they wanted to design the offense last year. So when we talk about how they need to use him differently, it's more about just now that he's a sophomore, now that your personnel has evolved, now that your quarterback is different, now that things are different, how does he fit into this? So if you look at Pro Football Focus last year and you look at their numbers, so what they do is they break things down really in fine detail. And so, I can know things and observe things, and then they give the data to back up what I believe to be true. And if you look at Michael Mayer last year, he was only targeted all season on 2 passes beyond 20 yards past the line of scrimmage. And one of those passes that they attributed him of being 20 yards down the line of scrimmage was in the end zone. So part of the 20 yards past the line of scrimmage was in the end zone. It wasn't a stretch the field kind of play. So I think when you look at Michael Mayer and how they're going to use him more effectively in 2021, I think the biggest one, the most noticeable one, is he's got to be used down the field more. And Vince, it wasn't even just vertically. Of his 42 catches, only 9 of them were beyond 10 yards past the line of scrimmage.
It was all crossing routes
stuff.
or
Short stuff. And the reason he had as many yards as he had is because he had an abnormal ability for a tight end to make yards after the catch.
Yeah. Absolutely. And he has an ability to make people miss, and he has the ability to run through tackles, which is obviously something that makes him special. There's no question, but he is the one that was responsible for those yards. It wasn't scheme.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you're right, that there's a whole middle of the field that has gone untouched basically by Michael Mayer that you can not only use to make him a better player, to expand your offense, but it's also going to open up for these wide receivers that are going to be doing stuff underneath, and it adds another layer, and it expands out what you want to do offensively, and it makes those guys better as well, because people are going to be keeping an eye on Michael Mayer. I mean, he's not a secret anymore.
Right. And here's some more Pro Football Focus data for you.
Okay.
So Michael Mayer had 22 catches for 204 yards on throws between 0 and 10 yards, so less than 10 yards, and between the numbers, right? So basically over the middle type of plays. On those 22 catches for 204 yards, 125 of those yards were yards after the catch.
That's more than half. Wow. Okay.
Right. And so he is a really unique player. And now it's about, okay, now he is a year older.
Sure.
Your offense has evolved. Now it's how do you use them differently? So here's some practical things to do. I think the first is obvious, and we've had people talk about this in our chats when we've brought these topics up in the past, and that's just using him to stretch vertically. You look at
seam routes.
Seam routes and front side seams, backside seams, all types of different ways. And we saw that with Cole Kmet in 2019, especially against Georgia. He caught 3 seam routes in that game. And I'm going to tell you right now, Cole Kmet probably should have caught about 8 or 9 more seam routes that year. I mean, he was open on them. He didn't get the ball.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not
seeing him run wide open, just like
Virginia is the game you're thinking of, because you've brought that up before. He's just like, he's in the middle of the field, like going like this to Ian Book, and just never saw him. But Jack Cohn will see that. I mean, you just watch his Wisconsin film. He's going to see that. And so I think that's another reason why I anticipate you're going to see a jump in production this year from him, because a guy that can already get you 10 plus yards a catch on nothing but short throws. I mean, think about it. The vast majority of his throws, he caught less than 10 yards down the field, yet he averaged over 10 yards a catch. That just doesn't happen a lot for tight ends.
No.
You just really don't see that. And so I think now you're going to use him on some of those seam cuts, use him on some of those vertical cuts. I think you can use him on corner routes a lot more effectively.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth.
That's going to be one. I think deep in cuts, where he's just deep option routes is really what I prefer as opposed to in cuts, because then he at least has the option to break out if the need be. Deep out cuts, so they ran some flood concepts this spring. We saw that, Vince, and I'd like to see him run those 15 to 20 yard out cuts where you can have you can have him running those kind of routes. And if you look at
against zone, I like that against the zone, and I also like if a team is
I like it against man too. He's a unique guy that can actually outrun some linebackers.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. And he is a good route runner, and he can jab inside, go outside, and lose a linebacker pretty easily. I'd also like to see, in a too high situation, even like a skinny post, coming from the slot. You know what I mean? Occupy.
And that's why I like the 4 verts concept, Vince, because the way that they teach it, the way that most teams teach it, is that actually converts into essentially a skinny post versus cover 2. And that, at least that's how I taught it, and I believe Notre Dame does the same thing. So what that means is Vince is talking about too high. So there's 2 safeties in the middle of the field, right? And then if you're running a 2x2 seam cut, or if he's the number 2 receiver in a 3x1 and you're running a vertical cut, basically what it is you release on your landmark. So, let's just say 2 yards outside the hash. And if it's a 1 safety in the middle of the field, so let's say there's a 2 high safety look and they roll, then you just stay up that seam. And you got to try to find that zone in between the corner and the free safety, because the corner is going to try to play both the outside and the inside. If it's cover 2 and the safety stay over top, then what you're going to basically do is, once you clear the linebackers, that front side safety or that front side seam route is going to bend towards the middle of the field in a 2x2. The backside guy can bend too. It just depends on, how you design it from a formational standpoint. So I think when I look at it, I say that's some things practically that you can do. And the thing I love about four verts and why four verts has been such an important concept as the passing game has evolved the last 30 years. And, curl flats aren't as, curl flats were like the route concept 30 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Now they're rarely used. I mean, and they're used in different ways and things like that. You see smash stuff, but you've kind of four verts is just still a part of everybody's package because it's so versatile.
Sure.
Because the go routes can turn into comebacks. They can turn into outcuts. The seam routes can bend. It's a built-in manipulation of you're going to react to what the defense does.
Right.
And so that's a concept that still is incredibly useful and helpful. And that's obviously two ways where you can just easily just say, bam, right there, just that concept. If you're just practicing that, thank you. If you're just practicing that on a daily basis, that is a concept that is going to get him 8 to 10 catches this year in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Go ahead.
I want to throw this up because Patrick, thank you very much, by the way, for the super chat. But it goes with what we're talking about. He goes, I just recently found your podcast as a former football player. So happy to find an ND podcast where the people actually understand the game. And since we were just going over two high concepts and vertical concepts, I thought that was
well, you're going to get that here. There's no doubt about that. We're going to speak your language here, Patrick.
No doubt. So thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah.
Welcome.
I think the other thing, too, with this, Vince, is I think this year with Michael Mayer now going into year 2, there's more ways you can move him around the formation. So
absolutely,
we talked about this. Like, let's say Kevin Austin is not healthy or can't give you 80 snaps a game or 60 snaps a game. And you're saying, well, we want to be able to go small at times, even if he's healthy. Another instance is you want to go small at times. So we'd really like to have some looks where we go 11 personnel, 3 receivers, 1 tight, 1 running back. Because as we said before, personnel is number 1, running back, number 2, tight end, and then receivers or whatever's left over. Right.
Right. Yeah.
So 11 personnel is 1 receiver or 1 back, 1 tight end, 3 receivers. So you want to go 11 personnel, but you want to go small. You want to get your fast guys on the field, but you still want to be able to maintain having that bigger presence. So you say, well, you don't want to put Braden Lindsey in the boundary. You don't necessarily want to put Xavier Watts in the boundary. So what do? You go 3 by 1. You put your 3 fast guys to the field, and you put Michael Mayer backside.
Oh, man.
And you let him be matched up back. So what are you going to do as a defense? You're going to put a corner back there, and then we're just going to beat you up with size. You're going to put a linebacker back there, and you say, okay,
yeah, right.
You're not running with Michael Mayer.
Baby.
That's pretty much what you do, right? And then it's like, okay, well, the best matchup you have is if you have a safety that has this combination of size and athleticism to play with him. Okay, that's fine, because if you want to have a safety help out with that, then now we have matchups over to the 3 by 1 side.
You've got one-on-ones because there's only so many guys you can double team.
Right.
I mean, that's just numbers, right? So if you're going to have a man over and you're going to have, a high-low over Michael Mayer on one side, and then you've got 3 other guys over here.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take that.
But those are the kind of things that when we talk about, Vince, is those are things you didn't I don't know how much I would have done that stuff with Michael Mayer as a freshman. So when I say they didn't use him as much as his talent maybe could otherwise dictate, it's not always just about your talent. If a guy's 18 years old and he's in his first year and he didn't have a spring and his summer was completely jacked up by COVID, how much do you want to throw on his plate?
Right.
This is kind of what we've talked about wanting to do with the receivers. He doesn't have to know the whole thing. There's a lot of things we've seen Notre Dame do with tight ends in the past that they did not do with Michael Mayer.
Right.
Right. But they made the decision that this kid's too good not to play, and they played him.
Rightfully so.
Good job, staff.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what we're saying now is now you're going into year 2. Now you can expand his repertoire a little bit.
Right.
And as you expand his repertoire, it then creates challenges that the defense has to respond to, and then how they respond to that is how you're going to respond with your other personnel. I mean, absolutely. I think of scenarios where, let's just say hypothetically, Notre Dame wants to kind of go with a fast alignment, okay? So they come out, and there's a couple different ways they can go about it. Number 1, they can put like Braden Lindsey, Lawrence Keys, and Avery Davis, or some combination of those 3, or Lorenzo Styles, or Xavier Watts.
There's a lot of fast
some kind
guys.
of combination of those 3 guys.
Yeah.
You have those 3 guys, plus you have Michael Mayer, and then you have Kyron Williams or Chris Tyree, whoever is part of the rotation at that point in time. And the point is, like, if it's Chris Tyree series, you don't have to take Chris Tyree out. If it's Kyron series, you don't have to put Chris Tyree in, because they can both be impact players. Or you could do this. You could go 21 personnel,
And
two backs, one tight end, which is likely going to get more teams to stay in their base defense. Like when you go two backs, you're not going to see a lot of teams go nickel. Right. I don't think. Maybe they should, but I don't think
they will
see that early.
Maybe they will down the road against Notre Dame if they start showing what we think they can do with that personnel.
Look, if you go 21 personnel, you can line up one play where you've got Michael Mayer at tight end, and you've got, say Braden Lindsey boundary side, and you've got Avery Davis or Lawrence Keys or whoever else field side, Xavier Watts. And then it's a two-back set with an attached tight end one play. The very next play, you put two receivers to the right, you put Michael Mayer to the boundary, you put Kyron Williams in the slot, and you make Chris Tyree be your number 3. You've just gone empty, and you've got 5 weapons in the pass game.
Right.
There aren't a lot of teams that can do that.
Right.
And then now you say, well, we're going to run some backside combos with Michael Mayer and Kyron Williams and see what you're going to do. And then if you want to overplay that, we've got some screen stuff, some quick game we can do over here to these guys. So the point is, because of the type of personnel they have at receiver and running back, it gives you a lot of versatility. But now that you have a tight end who's more veteran, more experienced,
right,
you can now use him a lot more. Where last year he was basically attached or slot. That was basically it, attached or slot, which is, again, not a criticism.
Totally get
it. Freshman.
Yeah.
But now he's year 2. You've got a spring under his belt. You got a summer under his belt. He was the guy in the spring. There's just so much more you can do with him now. But it's got to be about not just using him all over from a personnel standpoint. If you're moving him all over, but he's still running everything from 10 yards in or 15 yards in, it's going to make him easier to defend. You have to be afraid of Michael Mayer for the width of the field and the length of the field. Those are the two keys for them as far as how they use him. That's not only going to impress, that's not only going to be something that impacts his numbers, but I'm telling you, if they use him correctly, and I think they will, it's going to impact the whole offense.
Absolutely.
Just go look at what having Kyle Pitts did at Florida. Now, Kyron Williams or Michael Mayer and Kyle Pitts are two different types of players. Kyle Pitts is basically a big receiver.
Yes.
The point is, when you have a tight end that you have to defend vertically and after the catch and in the intermediate stuff, it's going to make it much harder to defend other receivers.
Correct.
And the way Florida used Kyle Pitts is similar to how Notre Dame can use Michael Mayer from a versatility, alignment, different type of route combination. Again, different strengths as players. There's things Kyle Pitts can do, Michael Mayer's not going to do. Like just basically run a 4-4. Right?
Right.
But there's things Michael Mayer could do that Kyle Pitts couldn't do. Mainly line up attached and block, and then you use him in the play action game and those kind of things. So, but the point is, because of how they use him so frequently all over the field and then all over the field in the pass game north-south as well, it just made it so much harder so what's your game plan going to be for Kadarius Toney at that point in time? And that's what we're going to see this year from Notre Dame is there's going to be a lot more one-on-one matchups with backs and other receivers because of where Michael Mayer's at.
Well, and you know, when you mentioned, Michael Mayer being lined up solo on one side with 3 receivers on the other, that just gets me excited because if you want to match him up with a corner, good luck. You want to put a linebacker out there, good luck. I mean, you're going to have to double him. You're going to have to, unless you've got a Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah type guy to put out there on him. And even then, I'm putting my money on
because Michael Mayer's 4 or 5 inches tall.
Of his physical presence. That's exactly right. So I look for Michael Mayer to be even more impactful in the red zone as well. And I know we're talking about stretching him vertically, which I completely agree with. Mm-hmm. But he is going to have – they're going to have to know where he's at wherever they're playing. But I think especially in the red zone, I think he's going to be really, really dangerous. And I would actually love to see him even lined up almost as like an H and put in motion. Yeah. Give him a little bit of a running start at times. You know, he could do that Tommy Tremble role, you know, that the kick out blocks, and he can do that kind of stuff. But then you put him in motion on that kick out block, but then he doesn't actually block. He just goes out on a route.
Right.
I think that could be really impactful too. But again, a lot of different things you can do with Michael Mayer, and that's the point that we're trying to make. He is not only going to up his own numbers, but because of that, he impacts the rest of the offense.
But and the thing too, Vince, that we have to understand is the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame has seen a lot of this during his time. I mean, go back and watch Tommy Rees when he was at Notre Dame. I mean, who was he throwing to for his entire career?
His tight ends,
right? And he had Michael Mayer, he had Tyler Eifert, who a lot of times they used in all the ways we were just talking about.
Yep.
Right. And then his last year, Coach Reese's last year, he had Troy Nicholas. Well, Troy Nicholas was a different kind of tight end than Tyler Eifert. He was more of a traditional tight end. So he got – and he had he didn't have as many volume touches as Tyler Eifert, but he averaged – I'm looking at like 15.6 yards per catch because they used him on a lot of deep stuff over the middle of the field. So, I mean, we've seen the coach, the offensive coordinator for Notre Dame, play with a guy that has similar body dimensions.
Yep.
I think they're different, a little different athletically, but they can do a lot of the same things. And as far as how you use them. And so when I look at that, I say, man, I just feel like Tommy Rees is a guy that's gonna know how to do this. Plus, you got to think about this. John McNulty came from the NFL.
Yes.
He was in the NFL for a while. How they use tight ends in the NFL is exactly a lot of the ways that we're talking about using Tyler Eifert. Tight ends in the NFL don't just line up with their hand in the ground playing and blocking 9 techniques all day. They move all over the field. They attack all over the field. So having a guy, the combination of Tommy Rees with his experience playing with this kind of tight end and a tight end being the main weapon. Yeah. I mean, 3 of the 4 years that Tommy Rees was in college, you had a tight end that was a 50-plus catch guy. And the reason I say that is because in 2011, they didn't have a 50-plus catch tight end because 2010, because Kyle Rudolph got hurt. But if you look at Kyle Rudolph's numbers and Tyler Eifert's numbers, they combined for over 50 catches and almost 700 yards. In 2011, you had Tyler Eifert that had 63 catches for 803 yards with Tommy Rees as the quarterback. 2012, your tight end had 50 catches for 685 yards, led the team in both categories, and Tommy Rees was obviously on that team. And then 2013, your top 2 tight ends combined for 42 catches and over 600 yards, almost 700 yards again. So this is a guy that knows how impactful a tight end can be for a quarterback. He also knows what it can do to a defense. And you have a tight ends coach who spent most of his coaching career in the National Football League.
Right.
Where
he's going to bring all kinds of different concepts and ideas.
Understanding matchups and manipulations and
that's what the NFL is. The NFL, well, football in general, but NFL more specifically because the talent level is so even at the NFL level. It's all about matchups, man. I mean, in college, you're going to have teams that are just better. I mean, just from a talent standpoint, the NFL things are a little bit more even. So
I don't care how good the coaches at Mercer are; they're still going to get embarrassed by Alabama because they just don't have players.
That's my point.
That's your point. I mean, Clark Lee is a wicked smart coach, and he hired some really good coaches. They're still going to get their butts handed to them most games this year because they don't have the players.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Right. I mean, that's just reality.
Right. That's my point exactly.
To your point, in the NFL, your point in the NFL is even the worst team in the NFL has a puncher's chance against the best team in the NFL.
Correct.
And any given Sunday.
Yep.
The bottom 80 teams in college football do not have a shot against Alabama.
Nope.
And that's true against Notre Dame, too. I mean, look at Notre Dame hasn't lost to an unranked team since 2016.
Right. And that's one of the things that we give Brian Kelly a lot of credit for.
Right.
They beat the teams they're supposed to beat. And, you know, there's not a lot of suspense anymore in those games, which there shouldn't be, by the way. But he has gotten Notre Dame to that point. So, the NFL things are a little bit more even, so matchups is what it's all about.
And creating matchups. You don't just put a guy out there and say, okay, you're better than that dude. It's a matchup. No, it's about how do you use formations, motion shifts,
but that's what I love.
Personnel groupings, things like that to create those matchups. And I think that's what we're going to see a lot more of this year. And I think that combination of Tommy Rees, and again, let's not forget, Tommy Rees and John McNulty have worked together before. Not just last year at Notre Dame. They were together in Tommy Rees's 1 year with the Chargers. John McNulty was their tight ends coach for that football team.
Yep.
So I think there's a level of trust there, which is I think why John McNulty came here in the first place. Was because I don't know this for a fact, but I'd be willing to bet that I mean, if Tommy Rees didn't think much of John McNulty when he's with the Chargers, do you think he'd be like, hey, coach, let's hire that guy? You know? No, there clearly was a connection there, a level of trust there that you see. And then, of course, John McNulty was an offensive coordinator in college as well. So, but, you know, when and let's not forget, Rutgers is a pretty good football team when John McNulty was the offensive coordinator there, you know, for a few of those years. So anyway, back to this. So I think those are things where you're going to see. You talk about, well, who's the alpha receiver? Well, his name's
87.
His name's Michael Mayer.
Right.
So now the question is going to be, okay, you know he's going to be a guy, but now the question is, Vince, how impactful is the 12 and 13 personnel going to be this year?
Yeah.
That to me is the bigger question mark at the tight end position.
I completely agree. And so we need to talk about who else is on this depth chart. So we're going to start oldest to youngest and work our way through the depth chart. So of course we're going to start with my guy, George Takas, and what he potentially can bring to the table. Look, I think this is a perfect storm for George. I think this is a great opportunity for him. And frankly, it's a great opportunity for Notre Dame because if George doesn't step up, there's guys that are willing to step up. So, but he's going to get first shot, I do believe. And from what I've seen from him, I think he can be a great number 2 guy in this offense. And this season, there's going to be a little bit less. There's going to be less 12 and 13 personnel, I think, than there has in the past. But I do think that that's still very, very important for Notre Dame. They still need that 12 and 13 personnel. I just don't think it's going to be quite as much because I do believe that the wide receivers are going to do a better job. Yes, sir.
Can we start that over again? Because you and I both froze for like a good solid.
Oh, did we really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because the reason I want to start over is not just because it'll play better in the podcast, and we can always edit this out later. But this is you just said it's your guy.
Yeah.
So
right.
You need to be able to explain why are you so high on George Takas, and what does a guy like George Takas add to this offense? So I don't want people to miss on that because you have some really good thoughts on this. Because it is a unique, it's a little different 1-2 punch than the one we had last year.
Oh, there's no question.
Because now Michael Mayer's the small guy.
Yeah, that's a good point, which is weird. But yeah, George Takas, I think this is a great opportunity for him this season. But it's also a great opportunity for Notre Dame because even though George Takas is going to get the first opportunity to be that number 2 guy, there's guys behind him that are just as willing and excited to step into that role. And I think that's only going to make this group that much stronger. But look, in the limited amount of time we've seen George Takas on the field, he's made plays. I mean, when he's been given the opportunity, he's made plays. And I believe that he will continue to do that. Look, he's not Michael Mayer, but that's why he's number 2, right? I mean, it just is what it is. So, and I said this last time when Brian dipped on accident, but he's back again. I think there's going to be less 12 and 13 personnel than last year because I do believe the wide receiving core is going to step up and be good. And I don't think it's going to be needed as much. But when they do go to 12 and 13 personnel, especially 12, I think that George Takas is going to do a great job, and I think he's going to be a nice complement to what Michael Mayer brings to the table.
I think so. And for George, though, to me, he's got to stay healthy, and he's got to turn his potential into production. That's the big thing because, as you said, Vince, there's some young dudes that are breathing down his neck, and I think he could be a unique player. I think he could be a really good player in this offense. I could see 12 personnel continue to be an important part of this offense. I hope that they do more balance of the different personnel groupings, but you kind of got to hope that Michael Mayer makes it so where it's like really hard to, we'd like to go 11 personnel, but man, we're it's just a hard time. And I think part of the reason that is important this year is a second tight end stepping up to where you're playing 2 tight ends because you want to, because they're just that good.
Yeah, good point.
It helps with the run game. An offensive line that you're not feeling great about, it helps with the run game. So I think those are some other things you look at and say they're going to need their 12 personnel this year. The question is they doing it because of out of a need, or are they doing it because those 2 guys are just too good not to be on the field together at times? That's going to be the big question because George is 6'6", he's 250 pounds, he's a big kid. He played a lot of the stuff that we talked about earlier, splitting out, one-on-ones on the outside, stretching the field. That was all stuff George Takas did as a high school kid. That was part of the reason that they saw from him.
Right.
I think he brings some of that. I don't know if he can stretch the field like quite like Michael Mayer does, but I mean, he reminds me a lot of like a Troy Nicholas type of body type, and can work the middle of the field. And we saw it in the blue gold game. I mean, the first long throw of the game to the tight end went to George Takas. It was a backside seam right down the middle, and George got there and made a good catch. And he's got really good hands. He seemed to be playing with a lot more confidence in the spring game than he had in the past year, which is really, at the end of the day, staying healthy and him having confidence in himself are the two keys to George Takas putting up the kind of numbers I think you and I both believe he's capable of putting up.
Well, and he was playing as the number one tight end, obviously, because Michael Mayer sat out the spring game. And I realize there were two teams, so there's two number one tight. I get all that. I'm just saying he was playing in that number one role. And I think if he's on the field at the same time as Michael Mayer, obviously he's not going to get the attention that Michael Mayer is going to get. So he's going to be in a lot of one-on-ones. And I with his size being 6'6", 250, that's a tough matchup. That's just a tough matchup all by itself. And he's going to make some plays. I think he's going to surprise a lot of people who have kind of forgotten about George Takas a little bit. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
And it's a big thing for me, however, like a very important thing for me. They're going to have to do a better job of utilizing the tight ends better together than they did last year. And this really ticks some people off. And right now, like the homers are like hitting the down button right now because I had the audacity to say that they didn't use the tight ends as effectively as they needed to. And the fact of the matter is that's 100% true. And you look at last year, by my count, when Tommy Tremble was on the field, he was used on a pass route on like 37% of his pass snaps. That's it. The year before, different coach, 48% as the number 2 tight end. That's a big chunk. When you're talking about hundreds of snaps, that's a big chunk. Brock Wright was used less than 25%, I believe, on pass routes, which meant when Notre Dame was in 12 and 13 personnel, as a defense, you had a pretty good idea that even if they weren't necessarily running the ball, that the receiver was not going to be running a pass route.
The tight end.
Michael Mayer, the second tight end. Michael Mayer was used on the pass route on 59% of the snaps he was in the game. Now that's going to come down a little bit because he's going to be on the field in more situations where they're going to run the ball, where he would get subbed out last year when they were going to run the ball a little bit more. Not all the time, but just at times. So when your second and third tight ends are 37 to 25% as far as route usage, you kind of know, like when 89 was on the field last year, you didn't really have to think about him. You didn't have to worry about him. You caught like 2 balls.
Right.
And you look at Tommy Tremble, who caught, I believe, 19 passes last year. I'm looking at the numbers now. He caught 19 passes last year. Well, he had 8 of them were in the first 2 games.
Yeah.
So you look at it and you say the next, 10 games, he caught 11 passes.
Right. Almost a third.
Six
than
games
a third.
with 1 catch, 2 games with no catches, 1 game with 2, and 1 game with 3.
Yeah.
So he wasn't being used. The point being, it made it a lot easier for defenses to kind of get cues on what Notre Dame was doing or who they were not going to use when those guys were in the game. So from a coaching standpoint, if they're going to go with 2 tight ends more, they need to make sure that they're really mindful of their self-scouting to make sure that those second and third tight ends are being used more in the pass game.
Right.
That's going to be a very important piece of this. Now, if you're using Michael Mayer more on vertical stuff, then you can use George Takas on stuff that we think he can thrive in, which is the crossers, the option cuts, the end cuts.
Yeah, right.
Stuff where he's working the short to intermediate
block,
stuff.
delay, delay routes, things of that nature. Yeah.
Right. But then also you can still look, if you've got 12 personnel on the field, you can still run your 4 verts really effectively, in my opinion.
Sure.
And so those are things they're going to have to do as well.
Because look, those matchups with the tight ends who would presumably be the 2 inside guys on those 4 verts. Look, you got 6'5" and 6'6" going over the middle, on seam routes. I like Notre Dame's chances. I mean, you're going to have to pick your poison on that one. So you're right. All of those concepts are still in play, even if they're in 12 personnel. I completely agree with that. And I hope that they do go to that a little bit more, because I think that can be to Notre Dame's advantage. And
that is not something we've seen Notre Dame do the last decade, if we're being honest. And we've seen 2 tight ends have good numbers, but it was usually like Cole Kmet caught a chunk of balls in 2018 when Alizé Mack went down, against Navy and Northwestern.
Right.
You look at 2010 when Tyler Eifert caught 27 passes and Kyle Rudolph caught 28. The minute Kyle Rudolph played 6 games, up through those 6 games to the point where he got hurt, Tyler Eifert had 1 catch.
Right.
And we've seen that in the past where, Troy Nicholas breaks out in 2013. He only caught 5 passes in 2012. So I think that's an area where Notre Dame's going to have to be more effective as far as using a second tight end as a more legitimate pass weapon, which is going to make it a little easier to use those concepts and teams not, because if you're doing all the stuff we talked about with Michael Mayer, but there's one less pass weapon in the route every time, it's going to make it easier to defend him. Because, earlier we talked about how you just don't have enough defenders to defend all those guys. Well, if you're in 12, 13 personnel and you're not sending your 12 and your 13 out on pass routes, it makes you now have enough dudes to defend those guys.
Exactly.
That's the whole point.
Right.
And that's what we're getting down to is there's times when you're only going to have 4 guys in a route. I get that. You're going to check release with your running back. I get that. But you can't have a bunch of routes, non-play action routes where you're only sending 3 guys out. And that's what we saw way too much from Notre Dame in the last couple of years. I was watching some Georgia film from 2019, and there was a play against Georgia, and this is before Tommy Rees, the offensive coordinator, where it's a 3rd and long, and Notre Dame drops back to pass, and the tight end and the running back both stay in and block. Cole Kmet stays in and block on 3rd and long.
Right.
And then shocker, Georgia's dropping 7, and no 7 can cover Notre Dame's 3.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
That's just, yeah.
And those are the things that I'm talking about, where you have to be more willing and more effective to do that. And that's where Jeff Quinn's going to have to really step up and make sure that those 5- and 6-man protections are more effective and more efficient. And then there's times where maybe it's, as a play caller, you move the pocket. Hey, we're going to move the pocket here. We're going to do something different, those type of things. And then that's where your screen game has to be effective. You have to be able to do things schematically to defeat the pass rush.
Right.
So the teams aren't trying to heat you up, which then allows you to get – and part of that is, hey, you want to blitz us, we're going to put everybody out in a route. Because if we hit Chris Tyree or Kyron Williams in a swing route, if we get that ball, you may sack us. But if we get that ball off and he catches that in space, the guy that's supposed to cover him is blitzing or a safety coming from depth, you're not winning that route. You're not winning that battle, opposing team.
Yeah.
And so those are the things we talk about. Right. Those are the things we got to talk about where the tight end's got to step up and play well. But if they do step up and play well, they've got to use those guys as pass options. And if they're not effective pass weapons, then you got to stick with 11 personnel more often because you just cannot. You cannot get Notre Dame's got to get rid of that old school mentality that even Alabama doesn't use. I mean, Alabama won 3 or 4 titles with that mentality. They don't do it anymore.
Right.
The old school mentality of, hey, we're going to put a bunch of tight ends on the field, just play smash mouth football, and we're going to win that way. No, you can't win that way anymore. And we saw it with Notre Dame. Look, they were really good beating up on the teams that they had better talent than last year.
No question.
But when it came down to it, and you got a healthy Clemson, and you got Alabama in the postseason, and that 12 personnel stuff wasn't moving the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not the 12 personnel aspect of it. It's just that you were not an aggressive attacking team with that personnel. And that's the thing that needs to change. I don't have an issue with 12 personnel. I think you can be aggressive attacking teams because of the uniqueness of the players in Notre Dame has.
Yep.
But you got to utilize them.
Yeah, the versatility that they have is right there. It's what you need. So, and speaking of versatility, let's talk about the next tight end, Kevin Bauman. He's a sophomore with freshman eligibility, right? So he's 6'4.5", 240 pounds, according to Notre Dame's website. What are your thoughts on where he kind of stacks up right now?
Kevin finds himself in a very interesting situation. He was banged up for a lot of the spring, which meant that was a lot of time for Kane Baron and Mitchell Evans to gain on him. He didn't have a spring last year, which hurt him as well. So he's basically almost a freshman.
Almost a freshman again. Yeah, right.
He did play a little bit last year, caught a pass, I think, against South Florida, right? Didn't play a ton. And, not having spring last year, not having much of a summer, I think it slowed his development down, as it did with a lot of guys. I like Kevin Bauman. I think he's a bit of a throwback tight end that has some modern tight end size and athleticism. He's a tough kid, good blocker, was a really good defensive end in high school. But he's a kid that to me is more of you're going to use him on more traditional tight end routes. I think he actually has a chance to take over some of the stuff that Tommy Trumbull did last year.
Okay.
That H-back stuff.
And H-back stuff,
because, he's not a real big guy. Like, he's listed at, isn't he listed like 6'4.5"? Doesn't look quite that big to me, like quite that tall to me. Plays with good leverage. Yeah, and I think his time on defense is something that has helped him play with good leverage. So I think he's a guy to me that could play some of that wing stuff, some of that H-back stuff, lead block on the edge, move around. I think he's a guy that, he's a good athlete, so he could be effective on the crossers, the option routes, the slides, things like that. So there's certainly a role for Kevin Bauman. And for most teams, Kevin Bauman's is your no-brainer number 3 tight end, and he's battling for number 2. But at Notre Dame, he's got to hold off the freshman.
Right.
And that's going to make it a challenge. So this is a big, big spring for Kevin Bauman because if you fall behind 1 or 2 of the freshmen now, and then you've got 2 more freshmen showing up next year, you could find yourself lost in the shuffle.
Yep.
On the flip side of that, with a big fall camp, Kevin Bauman's going to be pushing George Takas for the number 2 tight end job. So again, it's kind of, we focus on the concerning part first, but then there's the positive part where if Kevin Bauman, has some quick development this spring, you could see him push Takas, because the thing that Kevin Bauman brings to the table that I don't know if George does is I do think he kind of brings some more of that H-back stuff. Whereas if you're going to play Takas and Mayer together, it's almost kind of like Mayer's the better fit for some of that H-back stuff. And I don't know if that's ideally where you want to have him all the time.
Right.
Because you got to think about it. An H-back is starting from further away from the line of scrimmage. So it's harder to attack with anything down the field when you're starting from a wing position or an H-back fullback position, or you're on the move. Now you're kind of almost have to do sort of the under stuff, the angle routes, the slide routes, the option routes, the different double moves to kind of clear the defense out, and you come underneath it. It's harder to do. It's harder to run 4 verts when a guy's lining up from a fullback position. Now you can do it, but it's more of almost like a trail for 4 verts. What I mean by that is you'll run a play where if you're like and I used to love West Coast teams used to do this stuff. I used to love this route concept. Never ran it for like one of my teams, but I used to love watching it. I always tried to work it in. We just never had fullbacks that were really capable of doing it. We did once actually, but we did more like a screen, so not quite like this. But anyway, essentially what we would do is you have your fullback or a second tight end kind of lined up like a fullback, and you kind of run 2 verts with your tight end and your outside receiver, and then you have a guy running a backside. Well, then what you do is you have that fullback take a couple, gather steps, let that defense clear, and then you run a seam right behind them. So it's not a true 4 verts because there's different layers.
Right.
But those are different.
It takes the safeties and whoever's playing deep, it takes them out of it, and you're trailing behind. In theory, that it's like a big broom. You just swept secondary out of the way, and now you're behind the linebackers in a big wide open spot.
We did that at Muhlenberg, sort of. Like I'm looking at it as more of like a downfield route, but what we did at Muhlenberg is we would kind of bring our receiver in on a motion, and we would have the tight end and receiver kind of run verts, but they would switch at the line of scrimmage.
Yep. It'd
get the defense running their hips, and then we would actually go we'd go 21 personnel, but our second back was actually our number 2 tailback, who was a 210-pound kid. Really athletic kid. So we'd have him delay, and then once they turn their hips, he would just kind of follow right behind him, and he'd catch it 3-4 yards down the field, and he'd have room to run.
Right.
I'm not talking about that. That's more of like almost a delayed screen kind of thing. I'm talking about just like 2 gather steps, let them clear, and then you come right behind them. Teams do stuff like that a lot now. And so there's some stuff like that you could do, but as far as a traditional stretch the field type of stuff, it's harder to do that. And so I don't know if playing Mayer and Takas together gives you some of that as much of that H-back pass game stuff that you could maybe have with him. Or you could just say, well, you're going to have George Takas do it. But my issue with having a guy like George Takas do some of that H-back stuff is it's hard to get under the pads when you're at 6'6" and you're kind of already starting in a 2-point stance.
Sure.
Hey, that's a tall kid. And that he's a very long 6'6". I mean, he's got long legs and things like that. It's hard for him to have the kind of leverage. That's why Tommy Tremble's so effective at it, because Tommy Tremble's 6'3". He's naturally just playing lower and has more of that build. And that's why I think Kevin Bauman has some of that. I think Kane Baron has some of that natural lower build. Again, they're still 6'4", so they're not like midgets. They're still 6'4", but they just have.
I'm still looking up to both.
They still have lower builds where it's easier for them to get under the pads of an end or a blitzing linebacker or somebody like that. So I think that when I look at them, that's kind of what I see. That's what I like about them. That's what I think they can bring to the table that I don't know if you have with George Takas and Michael Mayer. That's fine. You don't need that. It's just different.
Sure.
But that's where I think that third tight end role is still going to be there for that type of stuff. So I think the third tight end this year is going to be more like that kind of player than it's going to be a guy that's doing the same stuff that Michael Mayer's doing.
That makes sense. No, that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about those freshmen, because you brought up Kane Baron. There's also Mitchell Evans. And they were here in the spring, correct?
Yeah, both of them.
That's what I thought. Okay, so they were both here. They both have a spring under their belt. Now they're going to get their summer in as well. I know you're high on Kane Baron and what he brings to the table. So let's just jump right in. Where do you see these 2 freshmen fitting into the depth chart, if at all?
I think they're both going to challenge for it. I think Kane Baron especially, because What Kane brings that Mitchell Evans doesn't bring is Kane brings exactly what I just talked about, which is the potential for that fullback type of role. Yeah. He can move around. And we saw him doing it in the spring. He was motioning. He was blocking on the edge, things like that.
Yep.
I think he's gonna push Kevin Bauman a lot for that kind of role, where Kane Baron can lead block. He's a very effective blocker, even though he looks like a pass catching tight end and he runs like a pass catching tight end. But he's a lot like Tommy Tremble in that, yes, he's athletic, but he's a willing and effective blocker, and he's a strong kid for his age. Well, now he gets a full spring under his belt. Now he's going to have summer workouts. He's going to add another 5 pounds, and he's going to put on good weight. They actually had him lose some weight when he first got here because he had bulked up to over 240, and they wanted to drop him down a little bit and get some of that weight back on because he had a really good offseason. But I think Kane brings some unique aspects because Kane can line up as an attached tight end and play that position. He can line up in the slot. He can line up outside. He can play the fullback. I mean, he might be the most versatile tight end that they have in regards to all the different things he can do because of his body type. He's big enough and strong enough to play an attached tight end position, but he's athletic enough and just not quite too tall to where he can't do some of those things. Like, and this isn't a lack of ability from George Takas. It's just when you're 6, because he's actually a little over 6'6". I'll bet you he checks in at like 6'6.5" at the pro days and stuff like that when he goes pro. Because he's very tall, George Takas. It's hard to ask that guy to now dip and get underneath the pads of a 6'2" linebacker.
And Kane Baron's listed at 6'3.5".
Right.
3 inches is a big difference.
Right. It is.
It is.
And 3 inches usually means it's usually like your legs. That's usually the difference. And so you're naturally lower.
So your limbs aren't, you're more compact.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Which is why Tommy Tremble was so effective at those things. Right. So I think that's where Kane can have an impact. And that's the thing, too, that Kane brings some unique things because he is so athletic. He's pretty fast. Kane's the kind of guy that now all of a sudden you're running some of those, you're running some of those delays. You're running some of those crossers from the backfield. You're running some of those screens. You now have a more effective weapon. And we actually did see Notre Dame run a similar route like this. Now that I think about it, they actually hit this kind of route against Bowling Green 2 years ago. Remember when they hit Brock Wright on like a little quick wide wheel route out of the backfield 2 years ago, and he caught it and ran up the field? Those are some things I think Kane Baron could be effective, getting him isolated from the backfield against a linebacker who can't jam him because he's coming from a wing or a fullback.
Right.
Getting him on slide routes where you now have to, if you're an inside linebacker, you have to chase into the sideline. If you get him, it's a 2-yard gain. If you miss him, though, he's getting up, he's turning the corner and he's getting off for a big play. But he also has the ability to line up attached and run 4 verts. He can line up in the slot. He's a good route runner. He's a guy that can, against safeties, he's athletic enough and big enough to beat safeties, but he's definitely athletic enough and fast enough to give linebackers problems.
Yep.
So I think, how quickly he picks up the offense and the confidence he's able to gain is going to be the big thing there. But if Kane Baron can mentally pick the offense up in the route and the different routes and be comfortable doing more things, and because remember what he has that and Mitchell Evans have that Michael Mayer didn't have is they had a whole spring. And not only did Michael Mayer didn't lose the spring because of COVID, Michael Mayer was not an early enrollee. So he wasn't in class. He wasn't at workouts. He wasn't in any of that stuff. He wasn't in meetings for 3 months before spring ball started, none of that stuff. And so those guys get that. They're going to have that advantage of just the time in the system. And that's why I think you're going to see look, Kane Baron is going to be tough to beat out. If Kevin Bauman beats out Kane Baron for that number 3 role, that means Kevin Bauman had a really good spring.
Yes.
Absolutely. A really good fall camp because Kane Baron is going to be hard to keep off the field this year, in my opinion. Yeah. He's just he's a unique, he's a lot, like I said, he's a lot like Tommy Tremble. And hopefully I think the other thing is he's a little bit more reliable from a hand standpoint than Tommy Tremble was. That would be the one thing to be a little bit different.
Okay. Do you see Mitchell Evans pushing at all to make a name, or do you think
you'd
he might
asked
be
me 4 months ago? I'd have said no way. He's a couple years off. But after seeing him this spring, and more so in the blue gold game, and again, I try to tell people don't get too into the blue gold games and things like that. It's not that he caught passes in the blue gold game, and he caught a drag route. He had a great 4th down conversion. Remember that diving catch from Drew Pine early in the game? It wasn't so much the production. He just looked so much more athletic and comfortable as a tight end. Like, he was always a good athlete. I mean, he played quarterback in high school. He was always a good athlete, but it was like, how comfortable would he be at tight end, and how would that athleticism translate to that position? And it translated pretty well.
Yeah.
There's still some things he's got to work on. His hands got to be more consistent. He's going to have to get a lot stronger as a blocker. But I was impressed with Mitchell Evans' athleticism. I really was. And he is George Takas. That's what he brings. He's going to do the things that George Takas did. 6'6", good athlete, not an elite athlete, but a smooth, fluid player that can do a lot of those things that George Takas brought to the table. So I would imagine he's going to have a tougher time playing as a true freshman, but it wouldn't shock me after what I saw from him this spring. I still think he's going to be buried a little bit, but now he's going to be buried. If you'd asked me 4 months ago, I'd have said he's just not good enough to play as a freshman.
Okay.
Now I could see him helping as a freshman for a lot of teams. It's just he may have a tougher time on this team simply because of the depth.
Yep, absolutely. Right. And so, the thing about the depth on this team is every one of these guys has eligibility. Right. Coming back to next year. There's only one of these guys who's even eligible to declare for the draft after this year, and it's George Takas. Right. But he doesn't have to.
Yeah, that's the thing about look, Mitchell Evans' role may not change from what I thought it was going to be 6 months ago, Vince, but the only reason it won't change is because of the depth. Whereas 6 months ago, I just didn't think he was good enough. But that's a guy that he's better than I thought he was going to be. It really is. And so that's good. Look, when I'm wrong about that, I'm happy. If I don't think a guy's that good and he pans out and he's better than I thought, that's excellent.
Yeah,
that's
a very good thing. No question. And looking at this depth chart, there's an argument to be made that this might be the deepest group or one of the deepest groups on this team as far as from a talent standpoint. You can make the argument.
I'd still put running back ahead just because I think I'd still put running back ahead because I think the number 2 running back's way better than whoever the number 2 tight end's going to be.
That's fair.
And I think 3, 4, and 5 at running back are every bit as good as 3, 4, and 5 at tight end.
But
and
I'm making you think about it though a little bit.
No, it's definitely thinking about it, but I would still go with running back. I'd still probably go with defensive line. But it's in the conversation, and it's certainly the deepest tight end depth chart Notre Dame has had in several years, which is saying something when you consider how good Notre Dame's been at tight end in recent years.
And then next year they're just going to add 2 more, and nobody's leaving. Potentially.
Right. Potentially. I mean, they're not going to have 7 tight ends on the roster next year.
Yeah.
Right. So somebody's going to be gone. It's just we'll figure out who that is, and that's part of what these battles we talk about is who's that guy going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, you want to jump into the comments?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, man. So we'll go right back.
Let's make a bold prediction, Vince. What's your prediction on the number of combined catches from the tight end position this year?
All right, so what did Michael Mayer have last year? You said 22?
He had 42.
42.
You had 61. You had 67, 68 catches from the tight end position last year.
68. I will say, you want to do like an over-under? You want to put the over-under at 70?
Okay, 75? Let's go 75.
75? Okay. 75 was the number I kind of had in my head. Mm-hmm. So I will be positive, and I will say over 75.
Mm-hmm. I'm going under.
Are you?
The reason I'm going under is because I think what you're going to see is the numbers are going to go way up. The yards are going to go way up.
The average.
Yeah, the yards are going to go way up because you're going to see, Michael Mayer could conceivably not improve much on his total number of catches.
But he could double his yardage.
I don't know about double, but he could definitely add a couple hundred yards to it for sure. Like, I don't see him being 42 catches for 900 yards because that would be well over 20 yards a catch. I don't think it's going to – but I could see him getting 48 catches but averaging like 15 yards a catch compared to, 10 yards a catch, right? Okay. So if he had 48 catches at 15 yards a catch, that's 720 yards compared to 450.
That's pretty good for a
right.
End.
So that's 270 yards on just 6 more catches. So that's where I think he's going to have a bigger jump in production. And then it's okay, well, what about the other tight ends? Same thing. I could see them combining for, only, maybe Meyer has 25 and they have 30, or he has 45, 48, 50, and they have, 24, but it's higher yards per catch. Just based on what we've seen. Now, if they use the tight end, the number 2 and 3 tight ends more in the pass game, then you'll get the over.
Okay.
But I think just based on what we've seen of how they use the tight ends the last 10 years, I think it's going to be slightly under on the total number of catches. But whatever the yards you were going to set, I'm taking the over.
I was setting it at 1,000.
Okay.
Just so you know. No.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, I honestly would take the over. Because
for total,
yeah,
for total,
yeah. Because if you took 1,000 yards divided by 75 catches, that's 13.3 yards per catch. I think they'll be a little bit over that this year because I think we're going to see more big plays from the tight end position. But I think if we're going to set it at 75, the over under, I think 1,000 is a good number because 13.3 is a pretty good number for yards per catch for an entire tight end position because Mayer could have 14 or 15, and then everybody else is like 9 or 10, and it's going to drag it down to 13.
Yeah, right.
So I think 75 for 1,000 is the over under on that. I'm going to go under on the catches, over on the yards.
All right, fair enough.
And I'm going double digit tight ends touchdowns this year. That's what.
I think so too. I absolutely think so. If they do the red zone the way it should be, plus I think you might break off a couple. Seam throws.
I only had 2
like
last year.
I am 100% on board with double digits. Yeah. I absolutely. Okay, we got a couple of we got a good day from D-Rock. We got Go Irish. Jordan says he loves the Daily Show. Thanks, Jordan. We love bringing it to you. Old Grim, I really feel bad for Old Grim. Golf got canceled today. I don't know why that would have been. I apologize. It's rough. It's rough.
But your consolation prize is you get to hang out with us.
Tyler says he loves the show too, and he wishes he could attend more. Had some free time today. So this is more of a question for you, Brian. Do they do a show during the week?
At night.
At night,
we do.
Yes.
Wednesday nights is normally when we do it. We don't do it every Wednesday because sometimes life gets in the way, and I got husbandly duties or things like that to do. But we do plan on doing a Wednesday show this week. It's Wednesday at 8:00 p.m. Eastern is when we'll do it. And then we're contemplating adding some more night shows during the season, but we're going to have to wait and see on that. And then part of that's going to be what's the attendance like during the summer, those type of things. So just a couple things we're throwing around, but Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. is when you can look for the night shows.
Coleman jumping in says, do y'all think Kevin Bauman is going to be more of a factor this season? Well, he's going to be more of a factor than he was last year. Mm-hmm. I think that's very fair to say. And it just depends on how things shake out with George Takas, and is there going to be a competition there? And what does it look like from behind him as well, right? Yes? No? Oh. And okay. Let's see here. Nick says, I made the live show. That's a surprise. Hello, gents. All right. Thanks, Nick, for joining us. Let's see. Coleman says, also, which of the freshman tight ends do you see making an impact first? I like Mitchell Evans more. And I think, Brian, you made a good point there that Mitchell Evans has climbed up your ladder as well, but depth may just still keep him off the field.
Yeah, but I don't like him more than Kane Baron. I mean, I think that opinion is being based strictly off the spring game, based on what. And then, Coleman had another comment later about the tight ends, and he said Kane Baron seems to be more of a blocker when I watch the spring game. That's exactly why you don't want to make opinions about things like that from the spring game. Yeah, if you'd have seen Kane Baron during the practice sessions, he is used on a lot more different things. But he is a guy that can block, but he does a lot of different things. So I would not view that based on that. I think Kane Baron is going to be the guy that makes the bigger impact. I think Kane Baron was ahead of Mitchell Evans throughout the spring. I think Kane Baron is a guy that better fits what they're looking for in the third tight end, because that's part of it too, Coleman, is it's not just about, okay, who's the third best tight end, but who fits the third tight end role more effectively.
Right. Well,
and if your third tight end does exactly the same thing as what Michael Mayer and George Takas do, then there's not as much value in his role as a third tight end, whereas if a guy brings a different skill set, that's the more important thing.
And you were kind of answering this question. That's why I threw it up there, Brian. Nick says, what role do you see our third tight end playing this year? More, same, less than Takas? Well, again, it just depends on what that role is, right? And if there's somebody that can fill it.
Yeah, the role for the third tight end should be what they did with Tommy Tremble. That's how the third tight end should be used. The second tight end needs to be used more as a dual threat weapon.
Right.
But the third tight end, I can completely understand being more of a lead blocker, pass protector, those kind of things. That's what I would like to see. Now, what would be unique is if they did some of that stuff. This is what would be really cool is you line up in your 12 or 13 personnel, right? And you've got, let's say you go 13 personnel. You're using your third tight end. There's some things where you could line up Kyron Williams outside and put Michael Mayer in the slot, George Takas a tight end, and then you've got Kane Baron kind of motioning into the backfield to basically be your pass blocker. And now you're attacking vertically with Kyron Williams or Chris Tyree and Takas and Mayer and whoever your receiver is. I mean, so there's some unique things you can do, but that's what was missing last year. When they were in 13 personnel, you knew what they were doing.
Sure.
And that's fine if you're only using it like short yardage goal line, but they would come out on like 1st and 10 in 13 personnel.
And they would use it for the entire series.
Yes. Yeah. And
this is our 13 personnel series, which it was
Yeah, and that's to me, that's tough to do because when you're looking at it, Vince, I mean, to me, you just look at the number of snaps that the third tight end played last year. Brock Wright played 345 snaps. That's a lot of snaps for a guy to catch what? 2 passes?
Right.
I mean, I think that's what his numbers were last year. Brock Wright, 3 passes for 21 yards.
Sure.
Your number 2 and 3 tight ends combined for 22 catches. And 8 of those came when your number 2 tight end was the number 1 tight end in the first 2 games of the year. Right. So to me, you just have to use them more. The number 2 tight end has to be used more, especially more in the pass game. He has to be more of a dual. He has to be, to me, number 2 tight end needs to be in the 40 to 45% at least in regards to how frequently he's running a pass route. And it can't just be check downs all the time. He needs to be a weapon. Doesn't mean he needs to catch 50 balls. It just means that when he's on the field, you have to respect him as a pass catcher.
Absolutely.
And he won't catch 50 passes, like I said, but it'll be that one time that you don't respect him, he beat you for a 40-yard seam route.
Well, again, that's where the self-scouting in the offseason is so important with all the analysts and everything else. I mean, that's
I just hope somebody's
so
saying that. That's the only concern.
Well, that's a solid point. I did see they were trying to hire a couple of new analysts, by the way. I don't know if you saw that.
No.
Anyway,
hopefully they can. I mean, that's what I want to see them expand the analyst role. And there should be somebody that's just, hey, this is your job. It's just to pick apart our entire system, to find our weaknesses, right?
Right.
I mean, that's what you do in the military, right? You should do, right? Is where are we weak? Where are we vulnerable?
Absolutely.
Let's shore those things up.
Yep.
Same thing with football team. Hey, look, your job is to figure out where are we getting exposed? What are the plays that just aren't working? If you were a defense, where would you attack us? You know, what makes it easier to do? And those are the things hopefully that they're doing. That's what every good staff does. Is you always like Nick Saban. What was the reason for Nick Saban to change offenses? They were winning titles. It was more about, but we're not going to keep winning titles in 3, 4, 5 years if we don't change.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to kind of think outside the box. And even when things are going well, be willing to change. And that's been Brian Kelly's biggest problem, honestly. And I know this is going to hurt some people's feelings, but it's the inability to change before crap hits the fan.
Right. Not just reacting.
You should have seen, look, again, I was pointing out a lot of the issues that we saw in 2016, myself, and there was a couple other people that were pointing these things out. Hey, you're masking some things that are problematic because you have Jalen Smith and Will Fuller and CJ Prosise and the best offensive line of football. There's some things that are problematic that are being masked, and next year, those dudes are all gone. And look what happened. But what did Brian Kelly say? We just have to coach a little better and play a little harder. No, you don't. You talented your way to 10 wins that year, and you didn't have that talent the next year, and you went 4-8.
Right.
And that's been the issue, is Coach Kelly has been way too reactionary, whereas Nick Saban is thinking
more visionary, ahead. Like seeing what's in front.
Yeah, and starting to make those changes. And that's what I hope Coach Kelly does, because he didn't used to be that way.
Right.
He used to be an ahead-of-the-game kind of guy before he came to Notre Dame. But part of that is you got to surround yourself with people that are willing to say, hey, this isn't working the way that it needs to work. Oh, we went 10-2 last year. Yeah, right, 10-2. Now 0 titles. Right. That's the thing, is you got to be willing to be challenged, and you have to hire people that will challenge you and that you respect enough to allow yourself to be challenged. That's going to be the key. If Brian Kelly does that this offseason, oh, man, this team's going to be exciting this year.
No doubt. Tyler jumping in, he says, I never heard of Coach John McNulty when he was hired, but loved his credentials in the NFL. What was your opinion of the hire and how he has done so far? Seems like he found a gem in Mitchell Evans.
Well, we'll see. Again, he did good in the blue gold game. Been there, done that.
Yeah, the
guys that did well in the blue gold game and never played again. So far, I agree, but let's pump the brakes a little bit on that right now. But I thought it was a good hire, Vince. When we talked about the time, there was a couple reasons why it was a good hire. Number one is we felt at the time that they needed a tight ends coach that could just focus on the tight ends. It's very hard for a guy like Chip Long to be the offensive coordinator, especially when maybe you don't have faith in some of your position coaches.
Sure.
To then also coach the tight ends. And
right.
so even though the tight ends were heavily involved in Chip Long's offense from a schematic standpoint, they weren't always as fundamentally sound as they needed to be. So you bring in a guy like John McNulty who can actually coach the position on a daily basis is his only responsibility. And I think we saw the technique of the position improve a little bit last year.
Yep.
Now, the production didn't really improve, and in some ways it went way down, especially touchdowns. I think they had 11 touchdowns at tight end the year before. And the yards per catch went down a little bit from where it was the year before. Not a ton, but a little bit. And but I thought they played sound football. I thought that he was able to get multiple guys ready to play at the position. I mean, even when guys got hurt, just George Takas slid right in and got the job done. I mean, they had 4 guys last year that stepped in and made plays.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's good. I think that some pluses that you have to John McNulty's, not only does he have a tight end background at the National Football League, but also he's a former coordinator. He was an offensive coordinator at Rutgers. So I think that was another plus when you hire a young offensive coordinator like Tommy Rees. You bring in someone he knows, someone he respects, someone he'll listen to, but also someone who has experience being an offensive coordinator.
Yes. I think that part was huge.
Yeah.
That was the biggest thing for me. And I agree with you when it comes to the tight end stuff specifically. But and I don't want to say I don't want to use the word mentor necessarily, but just a seasoned sounding board. Does that sound better? I think that's super important.
Right.
I have that as a coach with not only somebody on my staff, but other people. You need somebody to bounce your ideas off of. You just do, because when you're in a box, right, of your own brain, things can either sound really, really good to you or really, really bad to you, depending on your own thoughts. It's always good to have that sounding board. And I thought with their past relationship and the fact that he has been an offensive coordinator, et cetera, I thought that was the best part of that move.
Yeah, and now he was an offensive coordinator in 18 and 19 at Rutgers. It did not go well. But let's not forget that he was also an offensive coordinator at Rutgers back when Rutgers was in the Big East with Greg Schiano. And in his 3 years, his 3 years as an offensive coordinator at Rutgers, the first time around, they won 11 games, 8 games, and 8 games, which for Rutgers
was really good.
Really good. And the other thing I liked is 1 year he was an offensive coordinator. They were a very run-oriented team with Ray Rice. The next year, Ray Rice was gone. I think it was Mohamed Sanu was their best player, and they became a much more effective passing team. So it shows me that this is a guy that understands
to what you got.
1 year our personnel says one thing, and 1 year our personnel says another thing. So I think that's another plus. And then again, at the end of the day, we talked about this earlier. Him and Tommy Rees coached together before.
Right. Yep.
So it's very important when you bring in a young coach that if you're bringing in an older coach, and it's just someone who's coached before. It's not someone you had any connection with. He just has the best resume. That can be real problematic with a younger coach, because the older coach is going to think, I know more. The younger coach is going to think, well, I'm the offensive coordinator, and it can be a lot of this.
Absolutely.
The fact that they brought in somebody that they worked together before. So John McNulty knows, hey, Tommy, young guy, he wasn't even a full-time assistant coach when we coached together in the NFL.
Right.
But whatever, there could be some feelings there. But he's not coming here in that scenario if he doesn't respect Tommy's knowledge.
Right.
And look at it that way. And he's definitely not going to stay. He would have taken the first train out of South Bend to go back to the NFL.
Sure.
If
there's
it
jobs
was
available.
the deal. Right. Especially for someone with his resume.
Correct.
So the fact that he came here, he stayed here, he's kind of seems like content here, like happy here, tells me that there's a really good relationship. So instead of this, you have a much stronger relationship where Tommy's going to lean on his assistants.
Sure.
The assistants know that they can go to Tommy. And I have been told really from day one that Tommy Rees has a really good working relationship with Lance Taylor, that they work well together. I've heard that there's a really good relationship here with him and John McNulty. So the fact that you have that level of trust with at least 2 coaches is good for a young coordinator.
No question.
And so I was all about the hire. I think that he still has some learning to do in regards to recruiting.
Okay.
I think what was a great tight end to recruit to John McNulty at Rutgers is not a great tight end recruit at Notre Dame.
That's fair.
And Mitchell Evans still seems like a pretty good player, but is Mitchell Evans the next Michael Mayer, the next Cole Kmet, the next Tommy Trumbull, the next, go down the line of high NFL draft picks? I don't think he's that, which is fine. Yeah. That's okay. But then your next commitment's Jack Nickel, right? That's the mistake. Now, He seems to have learned from that mistake, and he went out and got 2 pretty good tight ends. But now we're looking at the 2023 class, and if what other people are reporting is true, that they are going to take Mac Markway, that again tells me that you're settling for not the best of the best. And when you're at Notre Dame, you got to go for the best of the best. And no, I don't think that they're going to take 2 tight ends. I think the only way they take 2 tight ends in the 2023 class is if they have a mass exodus from the current roster. You can't have 7 tight ends on your roster.
Oh, absolutely. And that was a question by Coleman. I want to throw it up because you were kind of going down that road when you're starting to talk about the 23 recruiting class.
Because like Michael Mayer will be gone. This is how crazy this is. Michael Mayer will be gone when the 2023 class arrives.
Yes. Yeah, he will. Wow. Yep.
Because let's be honest, folks. Michael Mayer's not a 4-year player.
No, he's not.
Barring injury, he's not a 4-year player.
No. He could be, if he has the season that you and I think he's going to have, if it were allowed, he would be a high draft pick after year 2.
Because he's so physically advanced.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. But he has to come back for year 3. So as a Notre Dame fan, yay. But
even then, you still have Bauman, you still have the 2 from this year, you still have the 2 from next year. That's 5 tight ends.
Yeah.
Right? If I'm doing the math correctly. Bauman, the 2 current freshmen, the 2 2022 kids, Stace and Raritan, that's 5. Yep. And if you brought in 2 more tight ends, you'd have 7. So even 6 is a lot for me. I mean, I think 5 is the sweet spot. 6 if you have the right
now
combination of players. If I'm okay with 6 if you have a situation like now. Like I was actually okay, if there was a 6 tight end on the roster now, you could say, well, let's just say Michael Mayer was a junior and George Takas was what he was. You could say, you know what, I could be okay with that then, because Mayer's going to go there with the NFL, and then you lose Takas, who's a veteran, and you look at it, say the numbers aren't great. So maybe we have 1 too many in one season, because then we're fine the next year. We don't have to rely on a bunch of freshmen.
Sure.
But you just don't – that's a lot of tight ends. Even for a team that uses their tight ends as much as Notre Dame does, that's way too many. Right. Way too many.
Coleman is curious as to who you would compare Michael Mayer to that has played or is playing in the NFL.
You got an opinion on that, Vince? I honestly just don't watch enough NFL to
I don't watch a ton of it. I'm definitely not going with that other 87. That I'm just not. I can't do that.
What other 87?
Gronkowski.
Oh no, they're different. No, they're different players.
Yeah. They're different players.
Yeah. I get tired of that baby Gronk thing, because it's just I don't like that. I don't like that. You'll never hear us call him that.
Nope. The fact that it didn't even.
I think George Kittle's probably
George Kittle. That's actually a pretty good one.
Probably the closest I've seen. Because again, part of me wants to look at Notre Dame guys, but he's more athletic than Kyle Rudolph was. I think he's more of a vertical threat than Kyle Rudolph was. I think he's a little bit more physical than Tyler Eifert was. So I don't know if there's necessarily a Notre Dame player that he relates well to. I think George Kittle's probably has a little bit more wide receiver to his game than Michael Mayer does, but that's probably the closest that I think I could find to that. He's a much better version of TJ Hawkinson, in my opinion, if you want to talk about draft picks. I think he brings more ability there, but yeah.
Michael wants to know what you think of Alabama offering Amarion Walker. They said he ran a 4.40.
Okay. Look, they've been claiming he's fast in the beginning. I just don't see it on film. I hope I'm wrong. And I've said this from the minute they got a commitment from him. I hope I'm wrong. I said it earlier about Mitchell Evans. If I don't think a kid can play and he can play, then I'm wrong. That's great. That's awesome. But the fact is you can run all the fast 40 times you want. You can do all that kind of stuff. I need to see it on the field. And he was banged up as a junior. He was just kind of okay as a sophomore. Yeah. I just haven't seen it. Now, maybe they're taking a chance and he ends up being a great player and all that kind of stuff. That's fine. But he's 170 pounds, soaking wet. You even saw in the picture of Nick Saban, like, good Lord, that kid's skinny.
Yeah.
I hope he's as good as advertised, but I haven't seen it. He doesn't play that much on a 7-on-7 team. He's like their 5th receiver on the 7-on-7 team. I don't see it. I really don't see it. Yikes. I don't see it.
Tyler has more of a comment here. He says Mayer's yak yards after catch is impressive. Never seen a 6'5", 250 guy burn linebackers and juke corners like he can do. His shake is very special.
Really is.
Yeah, no, there's no question. I love watching him in space. Just going down the sideline, just shedding dudes is special to watch.
Yeah.
No question about that. Notre Dame 2164 says, I'm so excited to see what Mayer will become this year. That along with Kyron, Tyree, Keys, Lindsey, and even Blake Fisher. I can't wait to see what this offense evolves into.
I get the excitement.
All the mile markers are there up to this point. Like
there's a lot of weapons.
There's a lot of weapons, and if they're used correctly, this could be a very fun offense to watch. I mean, just a fun offense. DJ says, as you remind us, Mayer had no spring and a limited fall. I'm looking forward to seeing him grow in his development. I hope they use him in the slot and outside, not just attached.
Yeah,
absolutely. We talked about having him around. I mean,
great
that's
minds.
the next. It's all part of the maturation process, right? I mean, that's where we need to be. D-Rock agrees with everyone. He says, so many offensive weapons out there. This offense should not sputter this year with all these options.
I love the next question.
Okay. All right. Oh, is there an eligibility loophole we can use to have Nico Cavadas fill the Tommy Tremble role?
No.
No.
Nico's going to be making a lot of money in Major League Baseball next year. I think that home run he hit last night, and again, the season didn't end the way he wanted to. I think that home run he hit last night was important because he turned on a 94, 95 mile an hour fastball. And I think that's been the one knock on him that I've heard from scouts is yes, he's a great college hitter, but can he catch up to the 96, 97 mile an hour heat? I think maybe that's a little bit more of a question. But to turn on a 93 mile an hour fastball like that and just blast it out of the
stadium.
I mean, he hit it into Georgia. Stadium. I mean, let's be honest. He hit it out of the state.
It was a statement home run. There's no question.
Yeah. And then there's another one from Larry that says, Nico looks like Coach. No, he does not. He looks like Robert Hainsey. That's who he looks like.
Hold on. I have the picture pulled up here if I can find it. Let me see here. Where did I put it? Oh, maybe I don't have it. I had it pulled up. And I don't know. Look, he's got
that's beard discrimination. That's beard discrimination. That's just you're saying everyone with the beard looks the same.
It is. It's
if you want to talk about like body type and who he looks like Robert Hainsey. That's who he looks like.
Fair enough. All right. Fine. All right. Let's see here. John says Tommy Reese's tight end in 2012, Tyler Eifert, at the same weight as Mayer, was a yak monster. Mm-hmm. He even led the NFL in yards after catch.
Now, Eifert's yak had a lot more to do with outrunning people. He can make some guys miss, but he wasn't the guy that was juking people in short play, like turning. I mean, Michael had at least 5 or 6 plays last year where he caught a third down pass short of the sticks, made someone miss, and picked up the first down. I mean, that happened a lot last year for a freshman. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't think Tommy Reese's experience, so many times I think you say, well, what this guy did in college, it's irrelevant with a coach because coaches are usually 10, 15, 20 years removed from their playing careers. Tommy Reese is not. Tommy Reese is like 8 years removed from his coaching career.
Wasn't that long ago.
First playing career, and it to me, it can have more of an impact on the kind of coach he is than maybe it is for a guy that's been, that's in his 40s or whatever the case may be. So I think there's some merit to look at that because one thing he had at Notre Dame as tight ends is Notre Dame had tight ends that were impact players that were not just short to intermediate guys. I mean, they were attacking down the field with those guys. I mean, look, what was the big play in the Stanford game? Was that Everett Golson pass to Tyler Eifert where he was, lined up, unattached, and they threw him a wide fade, and he made a big play. I think he was, if I remember correct, I'm going to have to look it up on YouTube, but I think Eifert was actually in the slot on that play, and they ran a wide fade to him. I'm going to have to look that up. But, those are the kind of weapons. Remember, Golson threw it to him, but Tommy Reese was on that play or on that team. But, those are the different things is he understands how effective a tight end can be when you use him correctly. And that to me, that's the big thing. I'm looking it up now because that was such a big time catch. You remember the play I'm talking about, Vince? That
vaguely, but yeah.
It. I'm trying to remember. It was him. Everett Golson threw it to him. I think it tied the game. Might have made it like 10-10. I'm trying to remember it. But anyway, the point is that he was able to find those guys and be effective with those guys, those types of players.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that bodes well for the not only the play calling, but also the the play imagination in the first place, right?
Okay, so I was incorrect. He was actually because he was not the outside receiver. So what happened was he lined up outside. This is completely relevant to now. This is even more relevant.
Nice.
He was lined up in the boundary on the play, and he ran a corner route, and they released Theo Riddick outside to kind of run the hitch part to occupy the corner. That then gave Everett Golson that window over top to throw it to. So again, relevant to what we're talking about now.
No doubt.
Receivers, a tight end that can line up outside, and a running backs that can make plays.
Right.
And of course, Everett just put it on a flipping dime. I mean, this is just a gorgeous throw. But that's the kind of throw that I've seen Jack Cohn make at Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And, that's what has me excited about what he can do.
Tyler says he'd love to see Mayer attach strong side, run a play action, then slip Mayer backside and let the linebacker or safety get caught in the wash.
It's a lot like that game putting it was like 31-17 against Stanford. It was the game that just blew that game open. The throw that Brandon Wimbush made it was Ian Book made to Alize Mack. Remember that? They did that kind of half roll. He was play side. Yep. He kind of delayed, and he just was wide open and racing the end zone. Yeah.
Yep. Clayton says, can you actually defend Mayer Davis and Austin and Lawrence? Oh, and by the way, Williams and Tyree, I'm legitimately wondering how you'd approach that as a defensive coordinator.
And he didn't mention Lindsey. He didn't mention Watts, Styles, Colsey. I mean, Takas. I mean, there's a lot of weapons on this football team. There really are.
Yes. No question. AJ says, I thought Michael Mayer was huge at 6'5", 240, and then I saw Georgia's Darnell Washington is 6'7", 260. Good Lord, both should be beasts this season. And then he continues on with, do you think at the end of the season, Mayer Takas and Washington Gilbert from Georgia will be the two best tight end duos in the country? How would you compare the two of them, the two duos?
I'm not in love with the Georgia kids, to be honest with you. I think that Washington is more of an athlete than he is a great football player, so he still has a lot to prove to me. And I think Eric Gilbert's a good player, but I think he's a little overrated. And I don't think they fit as well together, maybe as some other players. So I think the upside of the Georgia group is better because their number 1 and 2 are both legit top level players. I don't think either one of them are as good as Michael Mayer. So I think if you look at a duo, maybe Georgia's will be better, but I think that Notre Dame's duo fits together a little bit more effectively. But that's just me. I just think there's too many headaches with the Georgia side with Eric Gilbert. I mean, he was at LSU, left LSU, went to Florida, left Florida, was going to go back to LSU, and then shockingly picks Georgia out of nowhere. Don't know why. No clue why he suddenly picked Georgia out of nowhere.
Who knows?
But I mean, I just whatever. And I don't think Georgia uses tight ends very effectively. I mean, last year their tight ends caught 19 passes. The year before that, their tight ends caught
Wow.
They caught 23 the year before. They used Isaac Nada the year before that, caught 43, and then the year before that they caught 18, 22. They just don't really use their. I mean, they have their tight end group has yet in the last 5 years has not had a year where they had more production than what Michael Mayer had last year from a catch standpoint.
There it is.
Yeah.
Mike Gardner says, if Notre Dame moves to a more RPO-driven offense, how does that change tight end usage, if it does at all?
It doesn't. So, again, an RPO is simply a tag you add to a running play. That's it. If anything, it gives more opportunities for the tight ends to make more plays. So a tight end is not a change in philosophy from you're running different plays or you're not using certain – it's simply adding tags. So instead of asking your receivers to block on run plays, you're just having them run route combinations. That's it. So it's not like a huge, giant change. It's just – it is a change, but it's not taken away from anything. Like I said, if anything, it adds to it. I mean, look, we saw in 2018 when Notre Dame was running a bunch of RPOs, we saw Cole Kmet catching RPOs on third down and on both. I think it was against Virginia Tech and Northwestern, both games. Cole Kmet caught a bubble screen on a third down and picked up the first down on an RPO.
Yep.
So if anything, I think it gives them more opportunities to make plays, which if I knew for a fact that RPOs were going to be more of a part of this offense, like meaning it was going to be a stapeless offense, then I would definitely take the over on the 75 catches.
Okay.
Because I think you can add 10 catches to the tight end
Easily.
5 to 10 catches just on what they would normally do right then. But what RPOs don't do is they don't change your base pass play. So like RPOs don't become your pass offense. You still run dropbacks, you still run play actions, you still do all those type of things. It's just it's more of an addition to your running game. It doesn't take if anything, it enhances your pass game. Because now you're running pass concepts, and the other team thinks you're running you're doing an RPO, and so the safeties are still blocking the run or playing the run, and next thing you know, you're pulling the ball out and throwing it over the top to one of your tight ends or something like that. So, I don't. If it changes it would change it for the better. But I just wanted to make sure because this is a fair question that Mike's asking.
Yeah, that's a great question.
The RPO doesn't take away from your pass game; it only enhances your pass game.
Tyler has a very interesting hypothetical that I know you're going to enjoy. Tommy Reese is the quarterback and Chip Long is the OC with this current roster.
I'm assuming he meant quarterback's coach.
I thought he meant Tommy Reese.
I think he meant quarterback's coach. I mean, Tommy Reese would be a pretty good quarterback. He's 29 years old. He's got the experience. But, I think he meant quarterback's coach.
Tommy Reese in his quarterback prime as a college kid, maybe.
I'd still take Jack Cohen. With all due respect to Tommy Reese. Tommy Reese turned the ball over too much for me.
Okay. Fair
enough. Because he was a really aggressive, risk-taking quarterback, and he just turned the ball over too much.
But he had a lot of faith in himself.
Yes.
Which I love. It's just it got him in trouble sometimes. That's all.
Yeah. No question. No question. And Jack Cohen, to me, doesn't take that many risks. I mean,
right.
Tommy Reese threw 13 interceptions one year, 14 another, 8 as a freshman. It's a lot of interceptions.
Ronald chiming in. I love it, by the way. He says, how are the top flight spewers of Irish knowledge today? Hey, people, 86 viewers, 29 likes. Hey, I'm older than Moses and get how it works. Keep this continuing. Hit the dang button.
Just so everybody knows, those don't necessarily compute right away. It does take a while for those to.
Still funny, though.
Yeah, it is.
I love that guy. I love
Ronald. Yep.
Let's see.
So we got a couple of those receiver questions that we can get back to after we finish talking about the tight ends too.
Okay. All right. Let's see.
So I got these ones from Tyler real quick. He says Evans was more of an example of him getting younger players ready of McNulty getting depth players ready and how 1 to 3 tight ends played well last year. Yeah, I agree. I think he did a really good job with that. And that's why I think John McNulty is a really good football coach. I just think sometimes there can be when you make a big jump from Rutgers to Notre Dame, what you think like Jack Nickel, who's a good football player, would have been a stud recruit for Rutgers. But at Notre Dame, it's like you need to do better. And that's the thing. But as far as a position coach, I think John McNulty is an excellent tight ends coach. And what we thought of him coming in, he only solidified last year.
Right.
By getting a true freshman ready to play, by dealing with injuries at the position, by getting Brock Wright and Tommy Trumbull to play. I mean, look, Tommy Trumbull's effort is the primary reason he was such a great blocker, but his technique got way better in year 3 compared to was in year 2.
No doubt.
And I think part of that's up to doing Tommy putting in work, but the other part of that is you're getting coached.
Yeah. Yep. Brent says he's fashionably late, but he made it. He goes, I'm salivating over Michael Myers. I mean, Michael Mayer. Cue the Halloween.
If I wasn't going to get a copyright ding from YouTube, I would flat out start playing that music right now. There's no question about it.
That's great.
No question about it.
Richard Robinson says, great show as always. You nailed it earlier in regards to Mayer. Up to the coaches to come up with better schemes to open things up for him. First team All-American if they do.
Yeah, and again, I want to emphasize it wasn't that I think the coaches did anything wrong last year.
Right. I just think
he was a freshman.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
And your offense was different. You had basically decided you're going to be a ball control offense. And when you have that ball control offense, you need a reliable short to intermediate weapon. And that's what he was.
And he did very well in the position that they asked him to do. Yeah.
So for me, to Richard's point, and Richard, I appreciate you being part of the show. I appreciate the kind words. The only thing I would change from what you wrote is I would get rid of the word better, come up with better schemes. Because I don't think it's necessarily coming up with better schemes. I think the schemes are there. It's more about just enhancing the offense overall to now have him do some of the things that maybe in the past a receiver would have done.
Sure.
And taking advantage of experience. I don't know if they could have done a lot more with Michael Mayer last year. Because again, go to the Clemson game in November 7th. I mean, he made two pretty big mistakes in that game that cost them. Now he played better in the second half, and that's one thing we didn't talk about that I love about him is that is something that to a lesser player from a mental toughness standpoint, forget your physical ability. We've seen good football players and good athletes go in the tank because of making big primetime TV, most watched game of the year, mental mistakes that cost your team points. Yeah. Michael Mayer made two of them last year against Clemson, but it didn't phase him because he's not only physically talented, but he's got that little different thing up here where it's like, hey, look, I'm good. I'm fine. And he went out and made plays in the second half. That's something special too. It's not just the physical tools, but the point is he was still a freshman. Mm-hmm. And he was still a guy that you needed to make sure you weren't putting too much on his plate in round one of his career, so to speak. So I wouldn't say better. I would just say, now that he's older, put more on his plate.
Absolutely.
That's really what it boils down
to. Which you can do, which is the expected maturation process of a player like that anyway.
Right.
Brent says Mayer's neck is bigger than most guys' legs. Dude is just jacked from head to toe. He was built coming into Notre Dame like a guy that had been in the NFL for 5 years, which is one of the reasons that he was as good as he was.
Right.
He's just more physically mature.
He was a unicorn in that regard.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Guys aren't supposed to look like that coming out of high school. They're just not.
It took Cole Kmet 2-3 years to get to that point.
Yes,
physically.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Joe says the offense needs to create plays to really open up the tight ends. You kind of just touched on that. And then he also says, don't start the man crush on Mayer. I know
all right, Vince, no more putting the man crushes.
All right, fair enough. Okay. All right, fair enough. Ronald says, hey, Coach, I picked up 6 packs of cherry Kool-Aid today, drank a huge glass. ND wins 22 games this year, and we beat both Clemson and Bama by 60 points in the playoffs.
What also was in that cherry Kool-Aid there? That's what I'm curious about. Was there a teaser that you threw in there to top that Kool-Aid off?
Oh, that's fantastic. Ronald's really climbing up the ladder here for my favorite poster. I just want to put that out there. Nick has an interesting one here. He says, who is your favorite name on the roster? Mine is JoJo Johnson. I started looking at the roster. Mine is a tie between Bo Bauer, because I just think that's a middle linebacker name. That's
You're such a Midwesterner.
I just love it. And then Nana Sofa-Mensa, I think is a fun one as well. So those are my two.
Okay. I mean, how do you go against Sibo?
Oh, fair
I
enough.
mean, Sibo Flemish.
Yeah,
that's a pretty cool name. His name is Saborius. I think that's a pretty cool name. My favorite name is probably Litchfield Agevon. I think that's a pretty. It just flows like Litchfield Agevon.
It's unique.
I just think that's got a nice flow to it. I think that's probably my favorite name on the team. I don't know. I kind of look at that sometimes. Guy's got a name like, I don't think that guy's gonna play. Why? Look at his name. You ever met anybody that's good that had just like a normal John Smith with the catch? I mean, you don't see that. Like, you got to have a kind of a sweet name. But I think like Riley Mills has a pretty cool name. Like, that's the Bo Bauer for me. Like that's just kind of like, okay, that guy's gonna be pretty good. You know?
Yep.
But Braden Lindsey, I think, has kind of a cool name. I thought Jack Lamb kind of had that Bo Bauer type of name. Like when I think of Jack Lamb, I was like, oh, didn't he play linebacker for the Steelers? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that kind of thing. But Thomas put Maris in there. The problem with Maris is I don't think it's a great name if I can't pronounce it.
It's a little foul.
Yeah, I mean, you're sounding it out. We could do that for 2 years, and all of a sudden they say, by the way, that's not really how it is.
Yeah, right.
There's still people that don't know how to pronounce they say Tagovailoa. Well, that's not it. It's not Tagovailoa. You're just sounding it out. And as I've learned with young men that come from that part of the country, it's not always that simple.
That's fair.
Like,
that's
it's Tungavailoa. Well, I don't see an N in there. You know what I mean? Like, there's no N in his name, but there's an N in his pronunciation.
Making stuff up as we go.
Yep.
That's how we do it.
But those are probably my favorite names of guys on the team.
Liam says, any word on Schrouth, the guard?
Not that I've seen.
Okay.
And again, he's not a big social media guy, so there's a chance he could be committed for a couple hours before anybody knows he's committed. So, yeah.
Oh, that's really
it's fun. Like Thursday, like, oh, he committed on Tuesday? I didn't know that.
Brent, he says, you guys think of any big dog tight end targets in the 23 have the talent of Mayer?
I mean, again, as sophomores, yes.
Yeah.
I think Jackson Howard and Deuce Robbins could end up being those kind of guys. Now, again, they've got to develop, but you go back and watch when Michael Mayer was a sophomore and when where they were as a sophomore, but certainly have the tools to be that. Look, if you want to know, just look, here's 4 words that you need to learn. If you're going to ask me about tight end recruiting in 2023, just 4 words: Jackson Howard, Deuce Robinson. Just keep telling yourself that, because that's going to be my answer for everything. If you want to know who the best 2 tight ends on the board are, it's Jackson Howard, Deuce Robinson. Okay, who are my favorite guys? This is Jackson Howard and Deuce Robinson. Who has the most upside? Jackson Howard, Deuce Robinson. Who is the closest to Michael Mayer? Jackson Robinson, Deuce Howard. I mean, you can even start mixing them up. Jackson Robinson and Deuce Howard. I mean, however you want to do it, those are the answers. Like, so just insert those 2 names for any question that you're going to ask me about 2023 tight end recruiting. And if I could find a way to make it work to bring them both in, I would absolutely do that. It's just numbers wise, it's going to be a little tough.
Yeah.
But if they can make it work to bring in both of those guys, be the best 1-2 punch at tight end that I've seen, based on what they are now. Now, they may not get better or whatever else, but those 2 guys are absolute dudes, in my opinion.
All right. Let's see. Do we have one more in there, Brian?
Brent Breyer says one of the name ones. I like that. Lorenzo Styling Profiling. That's a good one. That's a good one. Lorenzo Styles Jr. That's got a nice ring to it.
I don't know why, but I dig juniors. I don't know, it just adds a little something to somebody's name. Not that I would ever name my kid after myself, but
but that's because Vincenzo Jr. is just not done the same.
It doesn't roll off the tongue.
Your kid's gonna feel like he has to join a certain society that involves themselves in underhanded activities, La Cosa Nostra.
Wearing cement booties with the fishes.
Yeah, there you go. And then Brandon had a question down there, Vince, too, about recruiting. Was wondering if you had a chance to talk with Jake Taylor last night. Was curious about the conversation and what he had to say about the visit. So Brandon thinks that I have interviewed him, and I'm just keeping it to myself and not telling anybody. No, I've spoken with Jake. We were supposed to talk a couple times, never followed through. We were supposed to talk with Junior Tuihalamaki yesterday, and he went silent on me as well, so I don't have anything new to report on either one of those guys. And as I said, my sources have indicated to me that they didn't make a move with Jake Taylor. At least Notre Dame doesn't think that they did. So, and then there's another talent that we have to kind of to get into on that one too. Brent has a comment regarding
Vince most definitely sounds like a mob boss. Gonna need you to pull some strings on some 5-star talent.
Yeah, well, then it's the last name too. It's like Vincent D'Addario.
Anthony's my middle name too.
Okay, so then bam, there you go.
Yeah,
I mean, so you're clearly mobbed up, and my wife was mobbed up before we met because she is very Italian. So her grandfather's name was Angelo, and he was from New York City. Do I need to say anything? Her dad's name is Salvatore. Her brother's name is Salvatore Jr. Okay, so I had to do my research on whether or not I was going to get kind of gone missing if I married her. So I had to make sure I did my homework on that one.
and just to follow through, he said, I know a guy. Don't worry, I know a guy.
Yeah.
But Zach, first
Welcome
time
to
watching
the show, Zach.
Thanks, man. Thanks for coming in. We appreciate it. So we had to get your question in here. He goes, I hope nobody's asked this, but who does everyone think is the most impactful freshman, or who it will be? Blake Fisher, I'm going to say.
Let's answer it 2 ways, Vince, to make this. So obviously overall, big guy, right?
Yes.
Blake Fisher. It's no
question.
What about skill player? Because I think that one is because you could talk about the 2 freshman receivers. Right.
Yep.
You could talk about maybe one of the backs stepping into the mix if somebody gets hurt. I think you could look at the DBs.
Brent's got my other one.
Brian Barnes, and then maybe Philip Riley. I think there's a lot of freshmen that could have a chance. And Brent went with Prince Colley. To me, the problem with Prince Colley is he's playing a position that's it may be a little tougher for him to get the numbers to make that kind of impact. Lorenzo Styles is another one. Deion Colsey is one. That's what I like about this freshman class, Zach, is I think there's a lot of kids that have the talent to make an impact. And again, when we mean impact, it's not, 60 catches, but if Deion Colsey comes in and catches 10, 12 passes as a true freshman, that has me fired up. If Lorenzo Styles catches 8 to 10 passes as a freshman, but not even just what Notre Dame's done in the past. It's just when you have the kind of veterans that Notre Dame has, there's just not a role for a freshman to come in unless he's Julio Jones or something like that, or Michael Floyd to come in as a freshman and be the guy.
Sure.
But if they can catch 8 to 12 balls as freshmen, and some of those passes are actually in meaningful minutes, not just, caught 5 balls in the second half of the Toledo game or something like that. I think that's an impact to me. I mean, that's an impact as a freshman when you consider just how loaded this team is. But there's a lot of guys that are going to have an opportunity to play this year. Which one is it going to be? I don't know. Maybe, Vince, we should do a show about that here soon. Might be a good idea.
We did maybe talk about that before the show was going to start. Yeah. So we're going to revisit some of those things or visit as the case may be. So we got a pretty good week here. Rest of this week planned out. Brian, I don't know if you want to go over what our schedule is going to be a little bit. And then
tomorrow, Vince will not be with us tomorrow. Vince, we will be doing a show. I'll be with Sean Davis. So if you guys remember Sean from a couple weeks ago, Sean will be hosting a show with me. We're going to talk Notre Dame's cornerbacks. I'm going to do a recruiting podcast last night. We'll break down some film tomorrow night. I should say Wednesday night. And Thursday, as of right now, is Vince and I going to be breaking down the offensive line. There's a chance I may have to have jury duty on Thursday.
Okay. New
just
information for me.
Yeah, depending on that, which I forgot about that. And then Friday, of course, we'll be back with our mailbag. And then next week, we're going to start our normal full rest of our summer, which is going to involve some team stuff. We're going to do some roundtables where we talk about just sort of the best of the Brian Kelly era. We'll have some recruiting shows, so we're going to change things up a little bit starting next week. But this week is going to kind of be a normal routine. We're going to finish up our position previews, and go from there. So Vince may be doing a show on Thursday with somebody else. Depending on how it goes with me and good luck, jury duty. So we'll have to see.
I hate to say it, but I've always wanted to do jury duty. I've never had an opportunity.
Well, and I'm not going to just make something up to get out of it because I do believe it is a civic duty,
Absolutely.
And but hopefully it doesn't come to pass. But fingers crossed, we'll see.
Yeah, and we're also going to start our opponent previews as well. Starting next week.
So we're getting into Florida, kicking off Florida State.
Jumping right in.
There is a question down there because we talked about this yesterday, and I want to reiterate. So as of right now, we're definitely planning to do one for the Purdue game, which is the third game of the year, second home game.
And Brent was asking when we're going to have our tailgate. What game we're going to have our tailgate?
Yes, and that's what I'm saying. Right. What game did you guys say you're having the tailgate thing?
Yeah.
Number one is we're definitely planning on doing it for the Purdue game. And the second one we're not sure of. It's either going to be USC or North Carolina. And they're back-to-back games. It just depends on whether or not I can get tickets for my parents for one of those two games is really what it's going to boil down to. So I have a feeling the North Carolina game might be a little bit easier to get tickets to than the USC game, but especially after having not played Notre Dame or USC last year. I think that game's going to be kind of wild, and it's going to be after a bye week. So that's going to be a wild game. So that is the plan. So definitely Purdue, Brent, and then hopefully we'll be able to figure out the other one sometime this summer and have a better idea.
All right. Well, it looks like that's probably going to do it for today. So we got a good week headed, or a good week planned here, and then jumping into our summer schedule next week. So
I see your comment, Mike, and you're not kidding because I actually kind of agree with that. As much as I like to argue, wait a minute, what? He's not guilty. Totally innocent.
If you get on there and you're not the foreman of the jury, I'm going to be very upset.
There's going to be problems.
I'm going to be just putting it out there. Yeah. But until tomorrow, I'm upset I'm not going to be there. But Sean will be taking my spot, and you guys are going to have a great talk. I'm really looking forward to watching or listening. So until tomorrow.
You're upset you're not going to be there. You're the reason you're not going to be there. It's not like I kicked you off the show so I can have Sean on.
I'm not going to say I was upset at you. I said I'm upset at the circumstances.
Just want to make sure it's clear.
I have a meeting
that I boot you from the show for Sean. I'd love to have both you guys on the show. And we're going to have some shows like that this summer, by the way.
Which I'm really looking forward to.
We're going to try to add some different 3-4 man type of roundtable type of stuff. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be different. It's not just Vince and I that the only ones talking.
Right.
And we've talked to some people already that are interested in it. So I'm really looking forward to doing some of that stuff. That's going to, I think, it's going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun. So, but until tomorrow, we will talk to you later and have a great afternoon.